The smell hit me before my brain caught up. Warm wax, gasoline, and something sharp that shouldn't have been there. Broken safety glass. I thumbed the garage door opener like I had every morning for almost 3 years. Coffee still in my hand, already thinking about a meeting across town. And then the door rolled high enough for me to see what was left of my midnight blue supercar. I didn't scream. I didn't drop my coffee. I just stood there, completely still, because sometimes the worst moments don't explode inside you. They freeze everything. The windshield looked like a frozen lake after a cannonball hit it. The hood was caved in. Both mirrors hung by loose wires. Tiny blue paint chips glittered across the concrete floor like somebody had spilled expensive confetti. I remember taking one slow breath and thinking, this isn't vandalism, this is personal. Then I noticed something almost too small to matter. A sliver of glass with bright coral nail polish stuck to the edge. Most people would have missed it. I didn't, because I'd seen those nails pointing at me during HOA meetings for the last 14 months. Her name wasn't Karen. Around Briar Ridge Estates, everybody knew her as Denise Holloway, the architectural committee chairwoman who somehow acted like she owned every mailbox, every driveway, every blade of grass, even though she owned exactly one house like the rest of us. Denise loved rules the way some people love their grandchildren. She quoted bylaws from memory, measured fences with a tape measure she carried in her SUV, and once actually timed how long my garage door stayed open, because she claimed visible storage areas reduce neighborhood prestige. I laughed when she said it. That was probably my first mistake. You see, I wasn't the loud guy on the block. I wasn't hosting parties or revving engines at midnight. My name is Mason Carter. I spent 11 years in the Army as a combat engineer before starting a structural inspection business. My days revolved around cracked bridges, damaged foundations, and making sure families crossed roads that wouldn't collapse beneath them. I liked routines. Early mornings, black coffee, quiet neighborhoods. My car wasn't some internet influencer trophy. It was the one ridiculous thing I promised myself after my final deployment. Every overtime shift, every missed holiday, every dusty mile overseas eventually turned into that blue machine sitting in my garage. Or at least it had been sitting there. Denise never understood that. To her, it wasn't earned. It was offensive. Nobody needs a car like that, she'd mutter loud enough for everyone at HOA meetings to hear. One evening after a landscaping discussion, she cornered me beside the clubhouse and smiled that never reached her eyes. You know, Mason, she said, people around here work hard. Flashing wealth around isn't exactly neighborly. I shrugged. It's parked in my garage. Denise, until you open the garage door. That's usually how garages work. A couple neighbors chuckled. Hers was the only face that didn't. Looking back now, that tiny moment mattered more than I realized. Embarrassment has a funny way of turning into obsession. Over the next few months, the violation letters kept coming. Garage door open too long. Trash invisible for 12 minutes after pickup. Decorative lighting allegedly too bright. A complaint that my driveway reflected excessive sunlight. I actually laughed at that one, until my next-door neighbor, Ben Alvarez, leaned across the fence and said quietly, "She's trying to wear you down." Ben had lived there 15 years. He'd seen HOA presidents come and go. She doesn't care about the rules anymore, he told me. She just wants to win. I ignored it. Maybe that came from the military too. You learn not every fight deserves your energy. I paid attention to my business, waved at neighbors, helped an elderly couple replace their porch steps one weekend, and figured eventually Denise would find someone else to bother. Instead, she doubled down. She started photographing my house whenever she walked her dog. She questioned delivery drivers. She even asked one of my clients why they kept visiting my property. The strangest part wasn't the harassment. It was the look on her face every time she saw that car. It wasn't anger anymore. It was resentment mixed with something almost sad. Like every glimpse reminded her of a life she thought somebody else didn't deserve. That's why, standing in my garage that morning surrounded by shattered glass, I didn't immediately call my insurance company. I walked back inside, opened the security app on my phone, and scrolled to 2013 a.m. The timestamp loaded. A woman in a gray hoodie stepped into frame carrying something long over her shoulder. She pulled the hood back before she even reached the car, almost proudly, like she wanted the camera to know exactly who she was. Denise Holloway. In one hand, a 10-pound sledgehammer. I watched the first swing land across the windshield, then another, 22 straight minutes. She never rushed. She never looked scared. She looked relieved, like every hit erased a little piece of bitterness she'd been carrying for years. And then, just before walking away, she smiled directly toward my security camera. That smile changed everything, because what happened next wasn't about an HOA anymore. It became a criminal investigation that would tear our quiet neighborhood apart, expose secrets nobody expected, and force Denise into making one decision so reckless that even the deputies who arrested her admitted they'd never seen anything quite like it. The deputies arrived less than 20 minutes after I called, and I remember one of them watching the security footage twice before saying anything. Deputy Aaron Mills finally leaned back in his chair, rubbed his jaw, and muttered, "Well, she's certainly not going to argue this wasn't intentional." There wasn't much to investigate. The cameras covered every angle of my driveway, the garage, and the street. The timestamps were synchronized through cloud storage. Denise had parked 2 houses away, walked straight to my garage carrying the sledgehammer, spent 22 minutes destroying the car, then calmly walked back home as if she'd finished watering flowers. Even the detective assigned later admitted it was one of the clearest felony vandalism cases he'd ever seen. By noon, half the neighborhood already knew. That's how suburban communities work. Nobody sees anything while it's happening, but somehow everyone knows everything by lunchtime. My phone buzzed nonstop. Some neighbors apologized. Others asked for copies of the footage. A few quietly admitted Denise had been making their lives miserable for years. But nobody had ever pushed back because dealing with the HOA felt exhausting. Ben walked over carrying 2 coffees and sat beside me in the garage without saying a word for nearly 5 minutes. Finally, he looked at the twisted hood of my car and sighed. She didn't hate the Lamborghini. I looked over. No, she hated the fact that you were happy. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else during the entire investigation, because happiness can look like arrogance to someone who's convinced life has cheated them. Around 4 that afternoon, detectives knocked on Denise's door. She answered wearing pressed khakis and a white sweater, smiling politely like she was expecting church friends instead of law enforcement. According to the body camera footage I later received through Discovery, she denied everything within the first 30 seconds. "I slept through the night," she insisted. Someone must have edited those videos. Artificial intelligence can do anything now. The detective simply asked, "Mrs. Holloway, are those your clothes?" Silence. "Is that your vehicle parked across the street?" Longer silence. "Would you like to explain why your phone records place you directly outside Mr. Carter's residence at 2:13 this morning?" Her confidence began leaking away one answer at a time. She still refused to confess, but she also stopped making eye contact. The arrest happened before sunset. Watching someone get handcuffed from my own front porch wasn't satisfying the way movies make you think it will be. Honestly, it just felt sad. This woman had spent over a year trying to prove she represented order and respectability, and now she was climbing into the back of a patrol SUV while neighbors peeked through curtains pretending not to watch. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. I almost didn't attend, but Ben convinced me. You need to hear what they're going to say. The clubhouse had never been so full. Folding chairs lined every wall. People who hadn't attended a meeting in years suddenly cared very deeply about neighborhood governance. The HOA president, Richard Bellamy, looked exhausted before the meeting even started. He cleared his throat and said, "First, we'd like to express concern regarding recent events." Before he finished, Denise's closest friend, Gloria Simmons, stood up. "Concern?" she snapped. "Denise has devoted years to protecting this community. One mistake shouldn't erase everything she's done." The room erupted. "One mistake?" somebody yelled. "She committed a felony." Another resident shouted. "She terrorized half this neighborhood." Gloria pointed directly at me. "Maybe if certain people didn't parade expensive toys around working families." The room went silent. Richard immediately interrupted. "Absolutely not." But the damage was done. For the first time, everyone saw the division that had been hiding beneath years of polite smiles. This was never really about bylaws or landscaping. It was about resentment, about people quietly deciding someone else's success must automatically mean unfairness. When Richard asked whether anyone else wished to speak, I stood up. Every eye followed me. "I'm not here because of the car," I said calmly. "Insurance will deal with the car. I'm here because some of you still think this happened over property values." Nobody interrupted. It didn't. It happened because one person convinced herself that envy was somehow justice. I looked around the room. If somebody can destroy private property this violently and still find offenders, Then we've got a much bigger problem than damaged vehicles. I sat back down. Nobody applauded. Nobody needed to. The silence carried more weight than clapping ever could. Over the following week, investigators uncovered something surprising. Denise hadn't suddenly become obsessed with me. She'd been targeting people for years. Retired couples, young families, a widower who painted his mailbox the wrong shade of black, a nurse who worked night shifts and occasionally forgot to move her trash bin before sunrise. Every complaint followed the same pattern. Find a technical violation. Escalate it. Personalize it. Wear people down until they gave in. Several residents came forward with emails, recordings, and photographs they'd kept for years. One elderly woman admitted she'd cried after nearly every interaction with Denise because she felt bullied in her own neighborhood. Another family confessed they had sold their home 6 months earlier, largely because they couldn't handle the constant harassment anymore. Detectives weren't investigating those incidents as crimes, but together they painted a picture that made Denise's behavior toward me seem less like an isolated explosion and more like the inevitable end of years of unchecked control. My insurance adjuster eventually inspected the Lamborghini. He walked around it twice before shaking his head. "I've handled hailstorms, floods, even bear attacks," he joked quietly. "I've never written deliberate sledgehammer assault on a report before." The repair estimate climbed past $180,000. Insurance would cover most of it, but prosecutors now had another reason to pursue felony charges aggressively. Denise remained out on bond while waiting for court, and officially she was prohibited from contacting me in any way. Unofficially, she couldn't let it go. About 2 weeks after the arrest, I noticed a black SUV parked near the community entrance every evening around sunset. At first I ignored it. Then Ben called one afternoon. "Don't look obvious," he whispered. "She's sitting across from your house again." I glanced through my living room blinds. There it was, Denise's vehicle. Engine off, just sitting, watching. She never stepped out, never spoke. She simply stared toward my driveway for nearly an hour before leaving. It happened again the next evening, then again. I reported it each time. The deputies documented everything but explained that sitting on a public street wasn't automatically illegal. "Just keep recording," Deputy Mills advised. "If she's planning something stupid, she'll eventually make a mistake." He couldn't have known how right he was. A week later, my repaired car hadn't even returned from the body shop yet. The garage sat almost empty except for my pickup truck and shelves full of tools. Around 11:40, one rainy Thursday night, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. At first, I almost ignored it. Raccoons triggered those cameras all the time. Then another alert came. "Garage motion detected." I opened the live feed. A flashlight beam swept slowly across the concrete floor. Someone had forced the side service door open. My stomach tightened before I even recognized the figure. Same height, same careful walk, same woman. Denise was back. And, unbelievably, she was carrying the exact same sledgehammer. Only this time, she wasn't looking for a car to destroy. She was searching through my garage like she expected to find something else entirely, mumbling to herself, opening cabinets, pulling drawers apart, growing more frantic every minute. I dialed 911 without taking my eyes off the screen. The dispatcher asked if I knew the suspect. I answered with 4 words that still sound unreal when I remember saying them. "She's already out on bond." By the time the first patrol unit pulled onto my street, I was already standing outside in the rain with my phone in one hand and the live security feed still running in the other. I had learned a long time ago that anger makes people reckless, and reckless people usually create problems that last a lifetime. So I stayed exactly where the dispatcher told me to stay. Inside my garage, Denise kept pulling open cabinets, dumping storage bins onto the floor, shining her flashlight into every corner as if she were hunting for something that only existed inside her own imagination. Then she spotted the security camera mounted above the workbench. She froze for one long second, slowly looked up into the lens, and I watched something inside her simply break. Instead of running, she raised that same sledgehammer and swung it straight at the camera. The screen exploded into static. She had forgotten one small detail. Cloud storage had already uploaded everything. Deputy Mills later joked that she had destroyed a $200 camera after it had already finished doing its job. The officers entered through the damaged side door and found her standing in the middle of my garage, soaked from the rain, breathing hard, still gripping the hammer with both hands. "Ma'am, put it down," one deputy ordered. For just a heartbeat, I honestly didn't know what she would do. Then the hammer slipped from her fingers and hit the concrete with a heavy metallic thud that echoed through the entire garage. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just looked exhausted. As they placed her in handcuffs for the second time, she finally looked directly at me and whispered, "You think you won?" I answered as calmly as I could, "Denise, this stopped being about me a long time ago." She looked away without saying another word. The investigation after that night uncovered the final piece nobody had understood. During interviews with detectives and eventually through her attorney, Denise admitted she had become convinced I was hiding assets, cash, or evidence inside my garage that would somehow prove I had cheated my way into buying the Lamborghini. In her mind, success couldn't possibly come from years of military service, overtime, sacrifice, and building a business. There had to be a shortcut. There had to be fraud. When the first arrest didn't validate the story she'd created in her own head, she returned looking for proof that never existed. That confession changed everything. Prosecutors no longer described the case as simple felony vandalism. They presented it as an escalating pattern of targeted harassment, criminal trespassing, property destruction, and violation of release conditions. Several months later, I sat quietly inside the courtroom while Denise accepted a plea agreement. The judge looked over his glasses before imposing the sentence and said something I still remember almost word for word. Communities survive because neighbors extend each other grace. When resentment replaces grace, neighborhoods become battlefields. There wasn't any dramatic shouting, no movie speech, just silence. Denise was led away, and for the first time in nearly 2 years, I realized I wasn't constantly waiting for the next violation letter, the next complaint, or the next confrontation. The HOA board changed almost completely within 6 months. New leadership removed dozens of unnecessary enforcement policies, created mediation procedures before issuing fines, and actually started treating residents like neighbors instead of suspects. Then eventually laughed one afternoon while we were grilling burgers and said, "You know what's funny? Kids are riding bikes again." I looked around and realized he was right. The neighborhood actually sounded different, less tense, more alive. My Lamborghini eventually came home after months of repairs. It looked exactly like it had before the attack. Every panel perfectly restored, every scratch erased. But something had changed, and it wasn't the car. It was me. I stopped thinking of that vehicle as the symbol of everything I'd worked for. Instead, it became a reminder that discipline isn't proven when life is easy. It's proven when someone gives you every reason to lose control, and you choose not to. Looking back now, I don't think Denise truly hated my car. I think she hated the story she'd written about me without ever bothering to learn the truth. Once people become emotionally invested in a false story, they'll sometimes destroy themselves trying to prove it right. That's the real tragedy here. Not the broken glass, not the repairs, not even the arrests. The tragedy is how jealousy, left unchecked, can convince an ordinary person that they're somehow the hero while they're destroying everything around them. So now I'd like to ask you something. If you had been standing in my shoes that morning, staring at a car you'd spent years earning, knowing exactly who destroyed it, would you have stayed as calm as I did? Or would you have confronted her right then and there? And after hearing everything that happened, do you think justice was served? Or do you believe the punishment should have gone even further? Share your thoughts in the comments because stories like this always spark different opinions. And I'm genuinely curious where you stand. If this story kept you hooked until the end, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more real-life community conflict stories, and share this with someone who's ever had a difficult neighbor. You never really know what's happening behind the perfectly trimmed lawns until one person decides that envy matters more than common sense.